Hi, and welcome back to the Road to React add-on series. Today we're going to talk about React component instantiation. And I felt like this section was a little bit more confusing than the previous few sections in the sense that he talks about classes, defining them and instantiating them. And he talked about components, and the connection is a little bit vague, if you will. So here's my take on it. The most important part is that there's two different types of components. One is functional-based component, and one is a class-based component. So looking at our app, you'll see we have the two components that we have so far that we've dealt with, app and list, both in app.js, are functional components. Then there's class-based components, and that's all Robin is trying to introduce. Well, at the same time, he's also talking about how to create or instantiate this class-based component, which at this point is not really a component. The example that he uses with first name and last name, the developer class, but so I think he's going to introduce just a generic class first, and then later we'll see how that looks like as a component. Okay, so with that said, let me just quickly show you what Robin did. He created a class called developer, and let's just say I'm going to create a developer.js file, and I'm going to have the developer code that he mentioned in there. Okay, so this is not a class-based component just yet. That's not it. So let me see if I can get the code for this one real quick. Okay, I don't think he posted a link to the code for this section, so I might have to, I don't know if I can copy paste from the book. I don't know if that's even possible, but let me try it. Nope, didn't work. Okay, so the idea, well, let me just show you the code from the book. So he has this developer class definition, has a constructor, and has a getter method. So these concepts are object-oriented concepts. So if you haven't been exposed to object-oriented programming, if you haven't done Java, this must be confusing. This must be incredibly confusing. But it's just, the way to look at a constructor is just saying that if somebody wants to create a developer, well, it's not a component yet, but an instance of this class, then you would have to call on the constructor, and then the constructor sets up the class. So if there's any class variable, so in this case we have first name and last name, then in the constructor is how we would define them, how we would set them. And the getter method is just something that returns one of these class instances, like first name or last name. Okay, it's actually quite simple, but if you're new to object-oriented programming, that is, then I can see this being confusing. On the next page, he shows an example of how to instantiate. You use that keyword new. See this new keyword right here? That's key here. So it's new, the name of the class, and then in this case, we look at the constructor and see what kind of arguments it takes in. Well, it takes in first name and last name, and that's it. So we created an instance here. And then here he's just an example of how to call on a getter method from that, using that instance. Okay, and I think the next example is the definition of an app component. He talks about how we are able to create multiple instances of a functional component. Again, very important, functional component versus class-based component. I want you guys to just remember that and know that that's a core part of React programming. So these are functional components, the list component. Here you can see there's two calls to functional components. I don't like it that my Kindle reader keeps bringing up the definition of everything I highlight. But here you can see there's one list component being loaded and another list component being loaded right there. So so down the road, when we see an example of a class-based component, you're going to see you can do the same thing with a class-based component. And you might be asking, what's the difference between a class-based component and a functional component? We'll come to that. In my opinion, a functional component is a lot lighter. It's a lot. So if you have a small component, in my opinion, use a function component. If you have something a little bit heavier, something that has more things to keep track of, maybe a class-based component is better. That's just my opinion and my experience. But once we get to that part of the book, things will make hopefully a little bit more sense. And we'll see maybe a clearer definition or distinguishment between class-based component and functional component. Okay. Yeah. And I think that's it. This was pretty much the section. Please don't forget to subscribe and let me know if you run into any sort of problems or issues, or if you have questions. In this case, we don't really have code that you run. So if there's just theoretical concepts that are unclear, feel free to reach out to me or, leave a comment. All right, guys, till next time, take care.